this video, I'll demonstrate the coloured pencil techniques I used to create this peacock. I chose to draw a peacock as I love the almost iridescent blues and greens that make for a very different colour scheme to my typical pet portraits. I firstly draw in the simple shapes and landmarks of the peacock using a graphite pencil. Then I move on to using coloured pencils. My favourite coloured pencils are Prismacolour Premier pencils, and I use them extensively in this video, as well as a few Derwent artist pencils. For the base tone gradient on the peacock's head, I use mainly aquamarine at the bottom and ultramarine at the top. I press lightly so I can blend the two pencils together seamlessly. The top of the peacock's head is made up of masses of mainly small spherical shapes. I make sure the left side of each of these masses is darker and the right side, where the light is hitting, is lighter. For the highlights, I use white pencil, but in areas where the white pencil is not having enough impact, I bring in my electric eraser to erase out some of the base tone. For the V-shaped area to the right of the eye, I use the same colour combination of aquamarine and ultramarine for the base coat. I then come into this area with indigo and black for the darks and white pencil for the highlights. I established both the darks and highlight details with short curved strokes of the pencil to show form. For the areas above the eye, I established the greys using cool grey 70% and the light areas with white pencil. The main reference photograph I'm using is a little blurry as it was taken from a long distance. To make up for this, I supplement it with a range of close-ups to make sure I can pick all the subtle details of the peacock. Now that I've established much of the texture and colour around the eye, I start shading the eye. I start with the highlights using light peach. I then lighten this with white pencil. Then I establish the pupil with black pencil. Then I move on to the iris, in which I use a range of browns in curved strokes to establish the spherical form of the eye. I use light browns such as burnt ochre all the way to dark browns such as dark umber. The iris is dark at the top, so I use a lot of burnt umber and dark brown at the top and lighter at the bottom, where I use some lighter pencils such as the burnt ochre. Once I've created a smooth gradient, I reinforce the outline of the eye with some burnt umber so it really stands out. I now establish some details around the eye using both warm and cool greys from the Prismacolor colour range. Once the greys are established, I then pull out a few highlights with my white pencil. For the second part of the top of the head, I use the exact same process I detailed earlier in the video. If you watched some of my previous videos, you probably know I normally use Stonehenge paper. Well, that paper was not available, so I'm using Fabriano Artistico, which I'm finding to be just as easy to work on as my typical Stonehenge paper. As I move to the back of the head, the spherical shapes dissipate and I need to draw some fur/feather texture. So I create a base coat using ultramarine and then I bring in some white highlights in short, slightly curved strokes. Once I bring in some of the darker blues using violet blue, ultramarine and indigo using the same curved strokes, the feathers start to look like they are glistening. I now start shading the area underneath the bird's eye to make the area look more three-dimensional. For the darks, I use warm grey 10% and warm grey 30%. I pull out some of the highlights with my electric eraser, and I also create some dots using a stippling effect to create detail and texture. For the cheek area, I use light cerulean blue, violet blue, and ultramarine blue in curved strokes to mimic the feather texture. For the top of the beak and around the nostrils, I use warm grey 20% for the base coat, which I shade in lightly. I use darker greys such as cool grey 70% for the darker triangular shapes on the top of the beak. Once I've established the greys around the nostril, I lighten the grey around the beak where the light is hitting with white pencil. I shade the nostril using black and violet blue pencil. I now finish the top of the beak using cool and warm grey pencils, ensuring the lightest areas of the beak at the top right are left the white of the paper. I create the line of the mouth with a warm grey pencil. To make it stand out, I add some rosy beige, which gives it a pink glow. I add some violet blue at the end of the beak on the mouth to make the mouth seem even more three-dimensional. Finally, I shade the bottom of the beak with a range of cool and warm grey pencils and finish it off with a little bit more of the rosy beige pencil I used earlier. To create the texture at the bottom of the head, I use light aqua as a base coat. I then use a range of colours including violet blue, indigo and ultramarine in soft curved strokes to give this area of the peacock life. Study the animal you are creating and make sure you use as much colour in their faces and bodies as possible, as this will help them jump off the page. I start on the neck by creating a base coat of light aqua on the neck underneath the head. I then shade around this colour with a base coat of ultramarine. This takes a while as I need to indicate the strands of feather texture as the two colours blend together. I bring in some indigo pencil on the neck underneath the head to create depth. For the dark strands on the neck, I use indigo and other dark blue pencils in sharp, curved strokes to create depth. For the lighter blue running down the middle of the peacock's neck, I use powder blue and cerulean blue for the base coat, so that you can see that the light is hitting the middle of the peacock's neck. I bring in highlights with a white pencil and some darks with ultramarine pencil. These are created with sharp strokes of the pencil. As I move down the page, I continue to complete the base coat for each section of the neck, and then I bring in the dark and light strands in all parts of the neck. This gives the areas depth and a feeling of three-dimensionality. Make sure you consider tone on your artwork. Highlights only look light in contrast to very dark areas. High levels of contrast will ensure your artwork looks realistic and jumps off the page. I decided to redraw the graphite sketch for the peacock's crest, as I decided the crest angling back to the left would look better compositionally. The next step was to start shading the crest with light cerulean blue in short curved strokes, as each part of the crest looks like a little fan. I then started bringing in ultramarine, indigo and black for the darker strands of each part of the crest. I then use a ruler and a cool grey 50% pencil to create the long strands of each feather called the rachis. Then I very lightly in very short curved strokes individually create each strand of the feather on both sides. The final step is to come to each of the fan shapes in the crest and use white pencil to show where the light is hitting each part of the crest, and indigo where the light is being included on the crest and thus making shadows. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel.